Before we begin, please visit this website so that you can follow along with the key points from this discussion. Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Noland, and I am here to talk to you about taking your lesson from the mundane. Now, in the video title, I didn't put what we're taking it to, and that's where we're going to get creative today. So, I started this quest on taking my lessons to from the mundane to something more interesting when I started finding that even I was bored in my classroom. And I started thinking about education and what that really meant. And what it's meant for so many years to so many of us has been that we stand and deliver in the front of the classroom. We pass out worksheets. The students do the worksheets. They turn the worksheets in. They get a grade. And we move on. And I've found that that's not the most effective way to teach, obviously. And I think many of us know that. But we don't understand why that is, all of us. And so, especially with our classrooms having shifted from being just normal, everyday, show up, give hugs and fist bumps and high fives, to now we have to work on the way that we greet students in giving waves and thumbs up and social distancing allowable welcomes and signs of affection for our students to show them that we care. Obviously, things have become much more different than they used to be, but it's also a good change because it's helping us come up with a very different way to teach our students. And it's actually something that we can do to change our instruction to become more effective. I am an interventionist at present, and I am a certified administrator. Like I said, education for about 15 years and loved every minute of it. But I haven't always done it correctly, and I'm sure none of us have. My first year of teaching, it always amazed me how, as I was teaching things, even cross-curricularly, I had things match up and align on accident. And I thought, wow, this is great how this works. I wonder if I can do it again next year. And I know so many educators who would say, oh yeah, you can do it again next year. Just do the same thing you did this year. And, things like, well, I've been doing the same thing for 10 years. Every year we do the same thing. And I started to realize how boring that is and how ineffective as a teaching practice that is. I know that when I was growing up, a lot of our classrooms were in rows, and we were not allowed to talk in class. Our teacher stood at the front of the room and taught us a lesson and then sat us down to do the work while we were already sitting and passed out our work. And that was what we were expected to do. But that's not the most effective way to teach. It's not the most effective way for students to learn. And it's definitely not very interesting. It's quite mundane. I found that I was making myself bored with teaching. I was finding it extremely uninteresting, and I didn't even want to be teaching it. I would find myself feeling sleepy and ready for a nap in the middle of the day because I was so bored. And yeah, you could say, well, I didn't need to learn it, so why did I need to pay attention to it? But truthfully, if I wasn't interested in it, how could I expect my students to be? Since this has been my first year outside of the classroom, I have not had to deal with the whole possibility of virtual learners as much as a regular classroom teacher. But overall, I feel like my career has prepared me for that because I've spent my time trying to figure out the best ways to teach kids and make their time valuable just like I find mine to be valuable. When I found myself teaching and using the copy machine on Saturdays all day so that way I could get my copies made, not worry about being in anybody else's way, and have my stuff copied for the next month. So all I had to do was pick up the next paper, teach the lesson, and hand it out. I realized I was doing things all wrong. Yes, many of my students understood what I was teaching. Yes, it was beneficial for some of my students. But there were so many that I could have reached better than I did. And I realized that after I had already made that mistake. So now as an interventionist, I go into a lot of classrooms, not just the ones next door and across the hall. I don't just see them as I pass down the hallway to go to the copy machine on my conference time or take my kids to lunch or specials. I see teachers all day long. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is a little bit displeasing. I know that we're not shaking hands and getting close to our students because of a serious health issue. But I also know that there were times my administrator might catch me behind my desk, and I'm like, dang it, they always choose right now to come in. But if every time that someone comes in your room, you're just standing behind your desk, you're doing it wrong. And I don't mean to be offensive, but you are. And you're not doing what's best for kids. And your calling as an educator is obviously to do what's best for kids and to get out from behind that desk. Keep your classroom interesting. Don't make it boring. So we're going to come up with some ways that you can, 1, make less copies. 2, come out from behind your desk. 3, get your kids in charge of their learning. And 4, realize that education can be fun and that every day can be a party day as long as you're partying it up with education. All right, so I'm going to step down from one soapbox to get on another. So we're talking about making instruction for students and not just I'm going to stand up here and tell you what to do and you're going to do it, and if you don't, you're going to suffer. So basically, the biggest dilemma that I find that most teachers have is that they don't necessarily understand what instruction truly is. And it's important for you to understand that in order to take your lessons from the mundane to anything else. So, first question, what is your curriculum? It's a big word, curriculum, front and center. If you said anything that you bought off of a teachers cheering resources site or found on Pinterest, your curriculum is actually your state standards. So for us here in Texas, that would be your TEKS. If you don't know your TEKS like the back of your hand, then you need to go back and look at the back of your hand and learn those TEKS. Because those are what your students are required to learn. Yes, all these file sharing resources have great ideas and fun things that will take your lesson from the mundane to something else. But those are just resources. They are not your lessons. They are not your curriculum. They are not what you follow page by page by page for your instruction to get you through the year. There are some really wonderful authors of resources out there, but your curriculum is your TEKS. Your TEKS have the standard that your students are supposed to learn and to what depth and complexity they are supposed to learn those TEKS, those standards. So if you look at a TEK, it says the student will blank. And it will tell you how in depth they should learn that TEK and how they should be able to use that knowledge and information to share their understanding. If you don't know your TEKS, get into them, dig into them. Especially since they're always something that's being changed, you absolutely cannot teach the same lessons for 10 years straight, because your TEK this year may be different than it is next year. And we've noticed that a lot with TEKS. There's pushing down, there's moving around, and it's all a big puzzle. You should also know where your teak begins and ends. That means vertically aligning your teaks. There are lots of resources out there that show you how to do this. But if your students are to know and understand a teak a certain way, you need to know what their past experience should have been with that standard and where they're going to be taking that teak in order to get a full and complete understanding of the topic, of that concept. And if you don't do that, then you're not effectively teaching. You're just going through the motions and pantomiming teaching. You have to understand exactly where your kids are coming from, exactly where they're going, and exactly what they need to know while they're with you. I've had teachers who I've spoken with, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing this lesson for? How did this meet with your teaks? Anytime that you are asked or discuss your lessons, you need to have that rationale, and that is that it goes with the teaks and it's best for your students. If you're just saying, well, I did it because it was, it went along with the book that we were reading, or I did it because we're going on a field trip next month and I thought it'd be interesting, I'm sure that there is some teak you can find in there to go along with everything that you do in your room, mundane or not. But if your rationale for why you're teaching something does not match your teaks, then you're not showing how you're following your curriculum. So those are my two main soapboxes. 1, what is instruction? 2, what is curriculum? Now, here's how I suggest that you plan for your curriculum, or with your curriculum, rather. I always looked through the top 8 to 10 concepts that were being taught in the curriculum that year, and I would place them in order, 1 a month. Now, one may take less than a month, and that's great because, let's be real, we don't always have a full 10 months anyways, and especially with testing. So I would take those big ideas, okay? We got some college football going on with our Big Ten, and then I would find the rest of the teaks, and my scope and sequence was the Big Ten. My lesson plans included all the ones that supported those Big Ten. So that way I made sure that I was hitting every teak. I was speaking to a teacher recently who said, oh my goodness, this curriculum we bought off of this website, it has so many copies to make. And I'm like, wait a minute, if you've bought a curriculum off of a website, you are not doing the state curriculum. So I explained that to this teacher. I explained what the curriculum was. And I said, that is a resource. And the great thing about a resource is you can use pieces of it and chunk the rest. Because there's nothing that says that you have to start at page 1 of a resource and go through to page 397 or whatever it is. The textbooks that you buy, same thing, a resource. They are not your curriculum. Many of them don't even cover all of your teaks. So as a teacher, you need to have that autonomy in the classroom to do what is best for kids all the time. We were discussing how the curriculum that she was using was confusing on the way that it was teaching some math information. And we discussed that was not necessary. If it was too confusing for the teacher to understand and too confusing for the kids to understand, how could we expect them to get it that way? As long as they follow the teak and they understand the standard itself and what they're supposed to do, what that standard calls for, the action, the verb that is in that standard, it doesn't matter how they get from point A to point B. If they can effectively get from point A to point B and use another form of problem solving, it doesn't matter. Because yes, they want you to teach them certain ways to get there, but the goal is just that they understand how they get from point A to point B. So we discussed that autonomy in the classroom. You need to be the teacher as a facilitator. Facilitate what your students need and what's going to work best for their understanding. Be their fighter for all that is good in the world. Pump up your lessons by helping ensure that they are not overwhelmed and stressed with information that even you're struggling with comprehending. And trust me, I've had many of those resources that I'm like, what? Where? How? I would never. And trying to teach something that I don't completely understand how they decided that was the best way to kids, I'm not effective. And if I am ineffective in instructing students, there's no way I can expect them to learn it. So those are my two big soapboxes, like I said. And so now it's time for the nitty gritty, how to take our lessons from the mundane to that something special, something amazing, something awesome. So let's get started. So that brings about the question, how can we shake up our learning? How can we make less copies? How can we put our students in charge and us just be a facilitator of learning? Well, I'll tell you now. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about is an app called Green Screen. It's got a cute little octopus on it. It costs a little bit of money, but I think it was only like $5. I originally heard about it from a professional development session done by the Green Screen gal. If you haven't heard of her, you can look her up. But she has tons of ideas about how to use a green screen and that Green Screen app to create some very interesting and effective lessons. Not only for you to give, but also for the students to participate in. For example, you can be teaching about the solar system in science. And you could have your students each take a planet and talk about their planet. They could, in small groups, learn all that they can about the planet and present it. They could have themselves standing in front of a green screen, like you see here. They could then put the planet Jupiter behind them, tell you all sorts of facts about Jupiter, and maybe even have a little spaceship fly in front of their faces across the screen, or a shooting star, or something of that nature. It's actually really neat. Kids love to watch themselves on video, and they also love to do fun things that are creative and techie. And this would be a great way to incorporate some technology along with their learning, but also putting them in charge. This could be, I am a huge proponent of problem-based and project-based learning. I truly feel like if you give kids the tools, then they need to work on how they're going to grow their learning and make it bigger and expand it. And you broaden their horizons by giving them those opportunities. So I have loved seeing what students can do. The great thing about the Green Screen app is that there is a demo on there that explains all the steps you need, and it even shows you which row your video will go in, if you want something to go in front of you, which row that would go in, if you want something to go behind you, which row that would go in. And that's helpful to me because even as an adult who loves technology, it took me a minute to figure it out, but I finally was like, oh, I'll watch the demo. Watched the demo and was like, oh, I've been putting my video in the wrong line. No wonder I can't see anything on my background. I still see the green screen. So anyway, it's pretty helpful and easy to understand. Something else that you could do to take your lesson and expand it, maybe in social studies or history class, you're learning about a particular period of time, or you're learning about famous inventors or authors or just people who have a place in history and are worth studying. What I have done before is we were doing a unit on the Civil War, and I gave a small group of students a section of the war. Like I wrote out little things on slips of paper, little events, and they had to go through and research those events, figure out what actually happened, and then they used the Chatterpix Kids app. When they got on Chatterpix, they added a photo that was related to their topic, and then they drew a mouth and gave their 30-second explanation of what had happened. And I gave them a number that they had to title their video when they sent it to me, so that way I knew what order to put their videos in. And that was a great way for me to use the Clips app by Apple, which I mentioned in another session in this Unfit Academy or conference. And I would put all the clips together from Chatterpix that each of the groups had done, and we would sit and watch it. And it was really neat because it explained the whole story of what we were studying, but it was done by the students. The students did all the work. They thought it was absolutely hilarious to see it go from clip to clip to clip of different pictures that should or shouldn't have mouths telling about what happened during that period of time. And they would watch it over and over and over again. So it was a really great way to embed that learning in them because they had so much fun watching their video and seeing what their other classmates had said, as well as listening and reminding themselves what they had said. So you can use different apps like Chatterpix and Clips to put together almost a slideshow of presentations. Something else, another form of technology that I have loved to use is the Seesaw platform. I like Seesaw because it allows students the opportunity to have differentiated activities that you can make available for them in the activity library. And it is great because they do the activity, it comes to you, you can approve it or send it back and tell them what they need to fix on it, and that keeps them in control of their learning because they are able to see what specifically they need to work on. They get immediate feedback. Those are some really amazing tools that I like to use. As I come up with more as we discuss, I'll be sure to mention those. But I just want to show you some different resources and things that you can use that are Google Chrome extensions in order to have your students add some pizzazz and some creative funk to them taking charge of their learning, as well as give you some other resources that you can access that will allow you some give you some ideas that don't cost an arm and a leg. So here we go. One of my favorite things to use in Google Chrome is Screencastify. You'll see it right here. If you push Screencastify, you will get to record your screen. You can also add it to where you have your webcam so that your students can see you speaking as well. And something fun when you're doing activities on your screen is to add a custom cursor. There are many custom cursor extensions on the Google Chrome app desktop extension in their extensions. Sorry. So maybe I am feeling the holidays coming in, and I want to have pumpkin pie. And anytime I click on something, that's going to show those cursors. So let's say I decide I'm going to go to the Seesaw app. When I'm showing students how to get into the Seesaw app, you'll see that it shows my cursors. Anytime I'm doing anything, I click on something and it shows the cursors. The most important thing to keep in mind, though, is that it doesn't work on all web pages. Another great extension that I like is this one right here called Volume Master. Let's say you're watching a video, but you've turned your volume all the way up on your computer screen, and it won't go any higher, and you keep trying and your kids can't see the video or hear the video that you're trying to show in class, you can use this volume master and it turns it all the way up to 600%. I've had years where I haven't had the best speakers, and this has been a great extension for me to be able to allow my students to hear the clips that I'm trying to show them in class. Another extension that I find most important is extensity. I love extensions, as you can tell, but sometimes I can't find them all. Or there's one that keeps popping up. Like this is one of my favorites. Right here, let me find it. Maybe I got rid of it. It was an app that would change the language of things to help me work on my Spanish. Toucan right here. I have it turned off, as you can see, but maybe I'd like to use Toucan and I can turn it on using Extensity. So I'm only wanting to use a few extensions. I can turn off the ones that I don't need, and I can turn them back on in this Extensity extension. Maybe I'm looking for an extension. I know it's up here somewhere, but I can't remember what it looks like. So I can look in this list and see what all the extensions and apps I have are. Let's say I want to visit YouTube. Rather than going and clicking on the little waffle, as people call it for Google, I can go into my Extensity, and since it's linked to your Google Chrome, it'll show you your Google apps. This gets me quickly to YouTube without having to go and type in YouTube. Another great resource is Newsela. You can change the Lexile reading level of the book or the passage that you're looking at, and there are activities, and you can even create a class and join it with your Google Classroom and assign it. There's this extension called Hover Zoom, which is supposed to zoom in on things, but apparently only works on certain sites. So I would highly suggest, if you get Hover Zoom, that you look at the information to see what all sites it works best on. There's also an extension called Read Up. You can look up a book's reading level. It works on many different sites where parents and teachers may be shopping for books that don't always list the reading level. There's another extension for interesting cursors. So just so I have choices. This is a stylus sketchpad where you could, on a web page, maybe you want to have students have a place to be able to work out a problem that they see on your screen. And you can have them work it out while it's right here next to the web page, so you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. Any of you that use Padlet, Padlet is a great resource. You can join up with Padlet for free and have up to 3 free Padlet pads at one time, and that's a great place for students to be able to contribute what they're learning and discuss what they find interesting. When you're looking for extensions to add, you will click over here on your 3 dots, go down to More Tools, and click Extensions. These are all the extensions that I have. Padlet Mini allows you to collect things to post on a Padlet, and you can create a free Padlet account if you don't already have one. It's a great way for you to share something and have students discuss and post thoughts and observations and inferences, whatever it is that you want. There's another one called text to speech that brings productivity. This will help for those students who are struggling readers. You could have them use this extension to change a website into to speaking the content. Ziteboard is great because it's a real-time whiteboard. So those of you who do not have access to a whiteboard can use this one. Even if you're doing some sort of video, you could do the video on Ziteboard, kind of like they do on their Khan Academy, and share the video. If you want to find more extensions, you open the Chrome Web Store. Here you can search for any type of extensions you may be interested in. I highly suggest Googling something like top Google extensions. It'd be helpful if I could spell that for teachers. And then you will find tons of lists of extensions that people recommend. There's some really good ones on there, and that's how I find most of mine. If you have multiple devices in your classroom, you could use Quizlet Live. You just go find something that you're teaching, click on it. As long as it has enough flashcards, you can use it for Quizlet Live. When you play Quizlet Live, your students will join using a code on their device. It will put them into groups, and it will have them compete in teams to answer the questions. Only one person on each team will have the correct answer. There are many ways to play a Quizlet Live. I've done relay before where they get in a line up all their tablets on a table, and only one person can go up and answer at a time. I've also done it where they work together collaboratively on teams and discuss. I've also used Quizlet Live to teach it in a way where they have to know the answer, so they play silent Quizlet, where they are not sitting close to their teammates, they don't know who is on their team, and they have to trust that everyone on their team knows the answer. The game takes you up to 12 points for your team. It asks many of the same questions over and over, so that way they really reinforce their understanding, especially if they get it wrong, obviously, because it'll tell them the correct answer, and then they need to rely on their memory of it. And then you can even play where you play first to 12, and they all get up to 11 points and stop, back away from their tablets, don't look at the last question, turn them over, something like that. And when every team is at 11, you say ready, set, go, and then they all flip over or turn to their tablets and see who can get the answer the fastest. It's really fun and competitive, but it's also a great way to reinforce what they're learning, and it's a great formative assessment to see if they've gained a level of understanding of the topic. So if you haven't used Quizlet Live before and you're looking for game ideas, there are plenty of other ways to play as well, but those are just a few ideas that you can use. This next idea for integrating tech in your classroom is pretty simple. It's an app called ZipGrade. You can use it to create Scantrons, and just with the click of your camera through the app, you grade their Scantrons. Now, they are showing paper Scantrons in this picture, but what I did was I printed off the Scantrons and laminated them. They give you different size sheets, but you don't have to have that many questions. So I would use these for, I would take task cards. Sometimes I would get prepared task cards, and sometimes I would take questions from a worksheet and cut them apart and have students go around the room to answer the questions on the task cards. They would fill in their answers on their bubble sheet, bring it to me, and I would scan it and know immediately what their score was. It made for a really great station or bell ringer activity. It is free for your first 100 papers a month. And unless you just have several large classes, you could probably get away with the free version. The ZipGrade app has updated itself tremendously since I used it, and they now have it where you can use your own device to have a student portal and allow students to take quizzes online. So that's another way to get a quick, formative assessments results on to track what they're learning. They have a where you can track your standards, and they give you the analytics of your data. So if you're a data nerd like me, you can check and see how your students are doing and what you need to work on a little bit more. Something else, and this is the last thing that I want to show you. It's very labor intensive, but it's not hard. It just takes a minute to wrap your head around what you want to do. And that is the digital breakout room. You start by going to Google and creating a Google site. I made this game for a 4th grade class that had to quarantine for COVID. I made it into a math maze, but basically we were focusing on place value and rounding. You can see that there is a bank of pictures here in this carousel, and I'm going to preview the page so that you can see what it looks like from the student side. Their first round, they had to figure out what number was being mentioned as the answer. It's nice to have you a round. The answer is 3 digits, has 2 zeros, and is less than 1,000. What goes in the blank? Your brain is the key to open the mailbox and figure it out. So they had a bank of numbers to look through and figure out what they could make round to have 2 zeros with 3 digits. That's less than 1,000, obviously, if it's got 3 digits. And they would put their answer in the blank. The great thing about Google Forms is, as you'll see, I was able to put each of the questions that I had for round 1 into its own separate section, so that way they answered this question first. And it's a required answer, as you'll see with the star, plus I made it so that they had to answer a specific number. And I gave them a hint. For this next section of the quiz on round 1, they had to watch this link on Khan Academy. So I gave them a chance to get a short lesson on the topic. And then I asked them another question. Again, you will see that it was required and the answer was specific. Once they finished the last question of that section, they were able to move on to round 2, which I put further down in the page, with another set of pictures that all had number themes. Once they finished round 2, they clicked to enter round 3, which is a separate page on the same website, but it is hidden so that way they can't just automatically go to it. Once they got to round 3, they had to explain what rounding was in a flip grid. So they clicked on the flip grid, which they could log in with their Google accounts, and then responded with their video Flipgrid format. Once complete, I was able to see their responses in the forms to see who participated and how far they got. You can see over here on my editing screen from my Google site, I was able to add in pages, but I could make the page not be shown in navigation, so they couldn't just automatically go to it. This is an activity that would take them some time to complete. So you could give this as a class activity while you have your students rotate through stations. And rather than rotating through a station, they would be working on their escape while you worked with groups in small groups. I highly encourage you to encourage your students to write their answers down on paper, because if you don't have them log in with their Google accounts, then, for instance, if they don't have a Google account, then their answers will be lost. So I just have everybody write down the answer regardless of how they're going to be using the application. And this is something that would take a couple of days for them to complete in a class period, which would allow you plenty of time to work with students and would allow them time to do an engaging and fun activity without you having to sit over them and do it. If you had a class that you taught multiple times, you could even have them create a digital breakout room for the other class to complete, or have them create one for another group in their class to complete. This is not something that you would have to do every time, depending on the age of your students, but it is definitely something that students find interesting and fun. Another way to do a digital breakout room could be to use Google My Maps. I've got 3 Google My Maps right here. And in these Google My Maps, all I did was I found an area on a map that I wanted to utilize, and I depicted different parts of Henry Ford's life. They got a coloring sheet that they would label and mark specifically with something that they learned in each area. So this Wayne County pin shows some information about Henry Ford, but then it says that they have a task. This one was to color his jacket gray and write his date of birth and place of birth on his pant leg. I gave more information here too on Detroit Edison Company. But what's really cool about Google My Maps is you can actually click on it and see live, or not live, you can see satellite shots and Google images of the area so that students can get a better feel of the place that you are having them being directed to. Again, this is just another great way to have them get some hands-on experiences about different places and events. And all I used for this activity was a simple coloring sheet that I found online. In order to give myself the link for future use of this activity, I put the link in the descriptor. As you can see, it's a very simple picture, but they had information surrounding the entire page by the time they had visited each of the locations. To conclude this video, I'd like to ask you to join me on Twitter to help me grow my digital professional learning community as well as grow your own. You are more than welcome to follow anyone that I follow because most of them are educators. I also use the hashtag Nolan's Namkeens. I have a YouTube channel where I present bite-sized snack tech ideas that teachers can implement in their classrooms. And namkeens is a Hindi word that means a snack-sized bite of food. So I thought it was very appropriate. I hope that you will post something on Twitter that you learned or that you'd like to learn more about. And I'd love to get in contact and see if we can share resources and ideas, as well as find ways that we can grow as educators. I am so glad that you joined me today, and I look forward to working with you again soon. I hope that you were able to get some good information out of this session, and that, if nothing else, you will just decide that it's more important to learn and grow in new things than be stuck in your old ways. These will be activities that will get you out from behind your desk, get your kids more engaged, and become higher level thinkers. And that's all that we're here to do. Well, not all, but that's a lot of it. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day.